Finance and Budgeting Committee meeting for Monday, September 11th, 2017. Will please come to order, and the clerk will call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher. Here. Mr. Schrein. Schrein is absent at the moment. Mr. Jones.
Here.
Ms. Brown.
Here.
Mr. Harrison. Ms. Harrison absent at the moment. Ms. Simon. Here. There is a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that Council President Brady and Councilmember Baker are in attendance.
Thanks, everyone, for being here, and particularly for Council President Brady and Ms. Baker for joining us this afternoon. And today is the 16th anniversary of the tragedy of 9/11, and I would like if everyone could stand and rise for a moment of silence in honor of all those who gave their lives, and particularly our first responders. Thank you very much. Has anybody signed in for public comment related to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair, no one has signed in.
You have in your packet the minutes for the last meeting, which was on July 6, 2017. Would someone like to offer a motion relative to those minutes?
Second.
We have a motion from Ms. Brown and a second from Councilman Vice President Jones. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Okay, thank you. And before we get on to our first item of business, it is always significant when one of our members achieves significant success, and so I would like to publicly congratulate Ms. Brown on her election as chairperson of the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party. Congratulations. Matters referred to the committee, Resolution 2017-0148. Ms. Janine.
Resolution number 2017-0148, authorizing a state contract with Dell Marketing for a Microsoft Enterprise Agreement for various licensing and support services in the amount not to exceed $2,749,993.98 for the period 7/1/2017 through 6/30/2020.
Thank you very much. We have Michael Young from IT with us to explain this resolution, and it is potentially on the agenda for tomorrow's council meeting if referred. So as part of your presentation, I would like if you could tell us why it's urgent that we should move it that quickly. Okay.
I'd like to refer to the documents I emailed the committee back on the 26th.
I don't think we have. I don't think you're coming through.
Oh, colorblind, thought it was on, my apologies. Okay, so I'd like to refer to the council to the document I had emailed them back in July, which has an overview of what an enterprise agreement is. The Department of IT is requesting approval of the Microsoft Enterprise Agreement. The agreement is a 3-year term that composes the items listed on page 3 of that document.
That's the same document, I'm presuming, that was distributed. So the members have it in front of them.
Yeah, it's a long list, so I'll pause a moment, let you guys refer it while I continue to explain what it's about. So the agreement supports the core licensing components that comprise the county's entire desktop, server, and database infrastructures, which includes transitioning our email services from our previous email provider that we all knew and love to Microsoft's platform, which is an enterprise-class, world-class Azure operating system. 3-year term, locks in pricing for 3 years. We pay out an increment every year. And I'll let you guys review the items that are on that list in case you have any questions pertaining to those items.
So the basic idea is rather than doing this in a piecemeal fashion, we put together a single large agreement for all these related services that we purchase from Microsoft. Is that correct?
Correct. We did it 5 years ago. We did a non-standard 5-year agreement with Microsoft back then. This year we went to a standard 3-year agreement, which is what they typically do worldwide. What this does, it locks us in and allows us to do any number of upgrades that we want at no additional cost. So for example, I'll use SQL as an example for that. When we were on SQL 2005, we upgraded to 7, 10, 13, 15, and didn't have to repay any of those licensing fees associated to those upgrades. Office, we went from 7 to 10 to 13, now to 16. Again, just one-time pricing. You don't continually, repetitively repay the licensing each time you do that. Email, similar action. Now we're also running Outlook 365, which is on their Azure platform. So instead of the provider that we had previously that was somewhat unstable, we transitioned to them over the course of the year with the final transition in July to their Office 365 platform.
Is there any impact due to the fact that the contract is dated to start 7/1/2017 and we're already well past that date?
Microsoft, just because it's part of their normal practice, just to continue with service until there are certain things we can't do from an administrative perspective in the environment until the contracts gets ratified. Certain add changes and delete in the email platform, as an example, we can't do until we get past that. We can't upgrade and move over to Skype for Business because that's an additional service until the contract gets ratified.
And is the rate we're paying the same, less, or more than we paid on an annual basis in the previous contract?
Overall, it's a better deal for the county, but Microsoft completely rechanged their pricing model. The way they did SQL, the way they price the servers, and the way they price Outlook is apples and oranges compared to what we had done before. So it's not a straight answer for you, but it is completely different.
For the entire package that we're purchasing, are we paying more or less than we paid previously?
We're playing close to being about the same. So when you look at the way an enterprise agreement works, so if I buy a SQL license in year 2 of that agreement, that's called a true up. You buy it then you don't pay it. We didn't pay anything on that particular license in year 3, year 4, and year 5. When year 6 rolls up into the new agreement, now you start your software assurance all over again. So you're starting essentially that licensing all over again, but you're not paying for the license, you're paying for the right to run and the right to upgrade at no cost. So when we were paying the last year in 2016, we spent $1.2 million for all of the Microsoft line with all the acquisitions that we had done over the course of time. With this agreement, plus the services side of it that went through the Board of Control, we're paying $1.1 million, which when we take the $715 from the previous agreement and the $400 we had in the budget for doing true ups, we're in line with what we were paying before.
Does anybody else have questions about the list of items on page 3? Ms. Baker.
Thank you. On the common questions, it states the ERP Solutions Foundation is based on the Microsoft platform. So first question is ERP is well in step and supportive of this.
Yes.
Second question is it coming out of the ERP's budget?
Their licensing components will when they're ready to procure them. They haven't done that yet because they're not ready for them in the schedule. When they do, they will come and it will be fixed pricing based on what we have in the agreement.
All right, thank you.
For purposes of clarity, am I correct that this is something we would do regardless of whether or not we were doing the ERP upgrade and that there's no direct correlation between the two, but as we move into the ERP, this will be folded into that process. Is that correct?
Correct. The ERP environment is based on a Microsoft platform. So any additional licensing required to run that platform will come out of and be part of the EA agreement.
Okay. Okay, please proceed. Any further presentation?
That was it, unless you have any
Okay.
other questions on the items listed.
Can you say a little bit about why it's urgent and why you would like to have it passed at tomorrow's council meeting?
Well, like I mentioned before, there's certain administrative services that we can't perform, so they're kind of stacking up. Like adding or removing employees who have left the organization. We can't administratively remove any of them, as an example, until we get that ratified. Skype for Business, we're excited to get moving on. It's very similar to WebEx, but we'll be able to send that out and distribute that countywide. And it's a collaboration tool for the organization, including yourselves, if you wanted to go as far as speaking in small meetings with your constituent base. We could set up Skype for Business so that you can do those types of things.
Any further questions? This does seem to be a routine continuation of what we've been doing in the past, and I would like to ask if anyone would like to make a motion to refer this resolution to the full council with recommendation for second reading.
Just a
suspension.
question before,
Sure.
if that's okay, Mr. Chair. In regards to the dollar amount with this, and this was part of what we budgeted for this period, right? So it's well within the budget, just on track with the next, okay, just want to be sure, thanks.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Brown?
I guess I'm just a little confused because I know we had an employee with us, Chrissy in particular. So are you saying that all administratives or sometimes these functions cannot be
There
performed?
are certain administrative functions that can't be performed. Lower level ones we can, but higher ones like setting up distribution groups and things like that, we can't do. Removing employees from old distribution groups and things like that, we're limited in what we can do.
Okay, thank you.
So when you say you're limited until we pass the agreement, or you'll still be limited even after we pass?
No, after that, it'll all be fully restored. The note I got from Microsoft this morning just said, just let us know when you're done.
So then you'll be able to do those things from here, and you won't have to go to Microsoft to do them, is that correct? Okay. Any further questions?
One last question. And it looks like we have a reduction in the service according to the last page. The new licensing model is 916,000.
That's for that piece of it. So what Microsoft did is they changed their business model. So all of the services, the support services that they had that was part of our EA before, they split out into a separate contract. That went through the Board of Control last month. So when you add the two together, the whole Microsoft umbrella is the 1.1 million.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, further questions? Does anyone have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we move this to second readings, under second reading suspension.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to refer Resolution 2017-0148 to the full council for consideration for second reading suspension. It is on the agenda for tomorrow's council meeting pending approval from committee, so if we approve it now, it could be passed at tomorrow's council meeting. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. It's unanimously approved, and it'll be on the agenda for tomorrow at the
Thank you
council
very
meeting.
much.
Okay,
Have a good day.
okay. We now come to the discussion of the county's second quarter financial report. This report is very important as the second quarter results are used by the administration to create the base budget for the upcoming biennium. Therefore, I consider today's discussion to be the unofficial start of the budget process. We begin the budget process with higher than normal uncertainty. As you know, we face a loss of $25 million per year in revenue due to the change in policy on Medicaid managed care sales tax, with only 1 year of transition replacement provided in the state budget bill. The legislature devised a longer-term fix, but the governor vetoed it. The House voted to override the veto, but the Senate deferred action, and discussions are underway attempting to work out a solution. Discussions seem to center around creating a 2-year fix rather than a 1-year fix, which would make us whole in the short term, but leave it to the next state budget process to determine whether such assistance would be extended longer or be for 2 years only. Until we hear otherwise, it makes sense to take the conservative approach and budget on the basis of a 1-year fix on MCO sales tax. This requires us to think outside the box and find ways to meet our service needs at lower cost. To provide just one example, note that justice and public safety comprises 72% of the general fund operating budget based on the 2018 estimate in the second quarter report, with everything else comprising only 28%. Jim Lawrence of Oriana House reports that Summit County is doing a much better job at prison population management than we are. With half our population, Summit County has only 1/3 as many prisoners in the entire county as we have just in the Justice Center alone, not including any of the prisoners we have at other locations. Lawrence estimates that just one initiative, an effective pretrial diversion program, could reduce our jail population by 400 to 500 inmates, a reduction that would certainly result in significant cost savings. Our budget situation requires a willingness to make tough decisions, along with creative thinking and the belief that budget challenges are an opportunity to find ways to do things better. It also requires that we all be actively involved and work together to create a 2018 to 19 budget that truly reflects our values and aspirations and moves Cuyahoga County forward. With that introduction, I call upon Director Keenan to present the second quarter report.
Good afternoon, Maggie Keenan, Office of Budget Management. Welcome back. So in general, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the major funds based on second quarter. As always, I'm open to being interrupted. If you have questions on something we're talking about at the time, I would prefer that really than waiting to the end. That might confuse people.
And the director's working off the green document that's been passed out to everybody.
Right. So the first slide is for the general operating fund. As a reminder, the general operating fund excludes the 0.25% fund, which is the additional sales tax that was approved back in 2007. So as of second quarter, we are projecting to end 2017 with an operating surplus of about $9 million. That means our revenue is higher than expenses by $9 million. Revenue estimates are actually up quite a bit from what we anticipated in the budget. We're $22 million over budget. $20 million of that is the bond proceeds that came from the Huntington Park debt service issue that we did last year. We had talked about this at first quarter too. We had expected those would be deposited in 2016, and they actually didn't post until 17. Expenditures are $11 million under budget. The total expenditure budget does include prior year carryover. There was about $10 million that came over from 2016 on contract balances. With the exception of 3 agencies, we're projecting surpluses in every agency and department budget supported by the general fund. The operating surplus has increased by about $4 million from what we reported at first quarter. Our revenue estimate has increased by $8 million, and the expenditure estimate has increased by $4 million, and I'll get into that in the next slides. At year end, we're projecting that the cash balance in the general operating fund will be $108 million, which is just short of 30% of total expenditures. Best practice from GFOA is to maintain a reserve equal to 20 to 25% of annual expenditures. We do have a county code requirement that requires us to keep no less than 25% in the general fund, which includes the 0.25% fund. For 2018, at mid-year, we're projecting an operating shortfall of $58 million. This means our expenses are short of revenue by $58 million. This is increased by about only $1 million since what we projected at first quarter. Assuming no change to revenue and expenditures, the cash balance would be just 12% of total expenditures by the end of 2018. In 2019, the operating shortfall is $57 million, and that's an increase of $6 million since first quarter. I can talk about that briefly just right now. The difference is that at first quarter, we weren't including any operating expenses related to the ERP. At mid-year, we are including those. So there were known costs for the maintenance on the new system, which is about $1.6 million a year, and there are staff that the department has requested to serve the new system, support the new system. At the time, it was 32 new staff, totaling about $4.5 million. So we included those in our second quarter estimates because they would not have been covered by the ERP budget. So this is operating costs. Questions?
I'm gonna break and see if anyone has any questions they want to ask now on the general operating budget, but there will be time also at the end of the presentation where people can ask questions on any of the slides. I do have one question, which is that the way I think of this in terms of the operating flow, it's looking to me like 2017 is pretty close to even. And the way I figure that is that we can credit ourselves $9 million because of the surplus, and we can credit ourselves $10 million because of the carryover from 2016. But we have to subtract $20 million, which is the difference in the timing on when we got the Huntington Park garage. So that comes out to about -1. Am I in the ballpark?
You are in the ballpark. So just as a reminder, when we passed the 2017 budget update, there was an operating deficit of $6 million. So at the time that we passed this budget, the expenditures were higher than revenue by $6 million. We knew that, it was planned. And then we did bring in, as I said, some prior year carryover. It was about $10 million from the previous year. And that's contract balances that were certified last year that we expect to be spent this year. So those two combined, we should have anticipated that we would have an operating shortfall this year. And it's not anything that people need to be concerned about because there was cash to support the prior year carryover and there was cash to support the $6 million. If you back out the Huntington Park garage proceeds, our revenue is up $2 million from what we anticipated in the budget. So we're doing fine for 2017.
We're
I
doing
should
a
have
little.
led with that.
We're
Yeah.
doing a little better than what was budgeted.
Yes.
On both the revenue side and the expenditure side.
Yes, because
Yeah.
expenditures are lower than budget,
Right.
so generally
And-
that's good.
Any other questions on the first slide? Well, we have Ms. Brown followed by Ms. Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to make sure I understood you correctly. The ERP will create more staff rather than reduce?
So what we're dealing with right now in the projections are what we know. So we do know that there was a request from the Department of IT to increase staffing levels to support the new system. I don't know at this time what positions, if any, are going to be reduced in the main departments affected by ERP, which is fiscal, IT, and human resources. So there's no way I can really estimate right now how much to cut from any department from those staffing changes. I do think there are going to be reductions in the future, but I don't know that it will be 2019 only because I don't think this system is going to be fully functional until 2019, and that seems early to like immediately say, hey, we don't need you however many people anymore. And so this is still something that we have to analyze when we actually start the new system. Right now, we're still reviewing our processes and trying to do the balance between what we've always done versus what this new system will enable us to do. So it's just too premature to tell. But I do know that we're going to be increasing staff. So, as the councilman mentioned in the opening statements, we're conservative. So I'm giving you the worst case scenario. When you see our projections, you should always assume that this is pretty much the worst case scenario. And we try to highlight in the narrative some areas where I think there might be some changes, but I can't put it on paper right now because I just have no way to guess.
Thank you.
Ms. Simon.
Thank you. Mickey, with regard to the expenditures lower than anticipated, what accounts for that? Is there any specific contract, or did something get cut? Do you know?
No, so we didn't make any cuts. In general, like I said, most of our agencies' departments are under budget. So there's no one large thing, and I can talk in a little bit more detail when I get to the expenditure discussion where we have some surpluses, but for the most part, it's just everyone. And I think part of it is that you mentioned this is the informal start to the budget process. We really started this in March with at least the executive agencies to say, hey, life doesn't look as rosy next year, so we need to start tightening our belts now. So I think some of that is reflective in the current year numbers, that people are really thinking twice about what they're buying, who they're hiring, how much they're willing to pay people. And so some of that's playing out in the current year numbers.
Would it be a fair statement that vacant positions accounts for a good portion of it, which it usually does?
It does.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions at this point? Okay, please proceed.
Okay. So jumping ahead to the next slide, this is just a little bit more detail about the revenue estimates for the general operating fund. As I mentioned earlier, we're 22 million higher than budget, but if I back out the 20 million for the bond proceeds, we're still 2 million above what we anticipated in the budget, so that's good news. For the individual major revenue sources for sales tax, the 2017 and 18 estimates do reflect the loss of the Medicaid managed care sales tax, which was effective this past July. September's payment, which I haven't received yet, this will be the first one we receive that does not include the Medicaid managed care sales tax. Included in this estimate also for sales tax is a transfer of $5.5 million from the 0.25% fund to the general operating fund, and that is consistent for the 18 and 19 estimates as well. And the impact of the Q Arena deal, which for sales tax revenue is about $150,000 a year. So this is taking the sales tax generated by playoff games, we're redirecting that to debt service for the Q. So I haven't changed this from first quarter. Sales tax is slightly under budget, even though we are actually up year over year, because at the time the budget was created, we didn't take into account that we're going to be making debt service payments for the Huntington Garage. So the Huntington Garage Fund is actually, that's where the cash is coming from, but the first payer is the sales tax. So it gets withheld from sales tax, and then I'll reimburse the general fund from the Huntington Park Garage, and we didn't know that at the time the budget was developed. So sales tax is a little less because of that withholding. And then we see an offset in miscellaneous revenue, which is higher, and that's the transfer in from the Huntington Garage Fund. The largest variance in revenue from budget and from first quarter is that we've significantly increased our estimate for investment earnings. So in 2017 now we're expecting to generate $10 million. The budget was $7.5 million, and that's about what we collected last year as well. The first quarter estimates were too low, and now we know I should have talked with the investment manager a little bit more about this. The estimates I got at the time didn't reflect that we are reinvesting all of our investments at a higher rate. So the interest rates were increased at the end of last year, and we're constantly reinvesting our investments that matured. So we're up $2.5 million in investment earnings this year, which is good. And we're anticipating another $1 million in 2018. 2018 estimates, the caveat is it's tough to tell because the rates can change. So this will fluctuate depending on what happens with interest rates. Any questions about revenue?
I have one. The fines and forfeitures always seem to come in short of estimates. My question is on what basis your 2018 estimate is $1.5 million or almost 20% above the latest 2017 estimate?
So the 2018 estimate and the 2019 estimate are increasing as a result of fee increases that the juvenile court is implementing. They actually went into effect last Wednesday, I believe. And if you'll recall, the juvenile court had proposed a number of fee increases and new fees in order to offset the cost of their wage implementation from the National Center for a State Court study. So we're expecting a slight increase in 2017, but the impact of those fee increases in 2018 and 19.
Any other questions on the revenues? Ms. Baker?
Thank you, and I probably missed it in what you said, but the miscellaneous, from the actual to budget to estimate, that fluctuation there. What, did you explain that?
So the largest variance is the $20 million of
Right.
bond proceeds that we had expected last year and they got deposited this year. That's 20 million of that, right there. And then in addition is, it's almost $1 million for the reimbursement from the Huntington Garage Fund
Right.
to repay the general fund for the debt service, and that wasn't anticipated at budget time either.
Thank you.
And then some of them are just, this is a hard category to predict
I
because we
know.
get literally miscellaneous reimbursements. I just want to point out too on the fines and forfeitures that prior to the calculating in the juvenile court increases is I am assuming a continued decrease in what we're generating from the common pleas court. So that revenue has been going down every year for the last several years. Mostly cases are down, and so that's reflective of what we're bringing in, usually a year or two later. So the 2018 and 19 estimates were reduced by about 2.5% each year, just assuming that that trend is going to continue. And then I added in juveniles increase.
Okay. Any other questions?
Mr.
Yes.
Chair?
Mr.
Just a
Vice
little
President.
clarification on the impact of the Q Arena project again. These numbers represent the bond?
So as part of the financing package for the Q deal, we are proposing to redirect some of the sales tax generated at the arena from playoff games only from the general fund to debt service. So the impact of that in 2017 was estimated to be $150,000. So that is factored into these numbers.
Is this from when we acquire the syntax dollars? Is that what this is connected to, the syntax, or?
No. So it's separate. There are syntax dollars that are going towards both the Q and progressive field, but that's a little different. So this is just for the major upgrades that were proposed, the 240 million or 100, whatever it is, 140 million.
All right, so that project is where it is at the moment.
Exactly. So I haven't changed my estimates. I'm assuming it's going to go forward by the end of the year as originally planned.
Okay.
To follow up on that question, in the Q agreement, there were items where we had to make payments labeled both 2016 and 2017,
Right.
which totaled in the low millions.
Yeah.
And my question,
5.4.
how much?
5.4.
5.4. Where is that represented in?
That's in the 0.25% fund. So I'll get to that in a few slides, but for the prior year payments, the 2016, those were the, I think 1.5 was 2017 and the rest of it was 2006 payments. So I'm taking that out of the cash balance of the 0.25% fund.
Okay, well, that fund can make that payment.
It can.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions on the revenues? Okay, please proceed.
Okay, so the next slide, this is focusing in on sales tax, and this includes not only the sales tax that's revenue to the general operating fund, but also the 0.25% fund. So this is general fund in total, so for sales tax. So what we're projecting for this year is, excuse me, about 266 million in sales tax. This estimate has not changed significantly since first quarter. I think I'm up maybe 100,000 or so. This is slightly less than budget for the reason I mentioned before, with the Huntington Garage, the Q Arena, and then also, particularly in the first half of the year, the percentage of our sales tax attributed to the Medicaid managed care was increasing. So last year, the average was 10%, and this year we were fluctuating between 11 and 12% earlier in the year. So that's why we're a little bit less, and then that's why the 18 estimates are also down. So right now I'm assuming that the hit is going to be a little bit more than we had originally anticipated at budget time. Through second quarter, our collections are up 3% year over year. If I back out the Medicaid managed care sales tax, we're up about, it's a little over 1% year over year. Total sales tax has increased on average 5% each year between 2011 and 2016. Non-Medicaid managed care sales tax has increased an average of 4% each year between those same years, and for the last 3 years, we've been up about 3%. What we're assuming for 2018 and 2019 is that sales tax is going to increase 2% from 2017 levels, excluding the managed care. Any questions on sales tax?
That would seem to be a conservative but reasonable estimate based on the
That's it.
information you have at this time.
And we monitor sales tax, as you know, because I update council monthly. We monitor this monthly. So we'll make recommendations to adjust spending patterns next year if needed, if the assumption doesn't hold true. But based on priors, I think 2% is safe.
Okay. Any questions on the sales tax? Okay. May proceed. On to the expenditures.
So as I mentioned, expenses are projected to be about $11 million, less than what we anticipated in the budget. We have surpluses in all but 3 of our agency budgets in the general operating fund. And the agencies that we're projecting shortfalls for right now are the public defender, juvenile court, and common pleas court. Juvenile court and common pleas court, by the end of the year, they will have eliminated their deficit through either using their special revenue funds, transferring cash into the general fund, or transferring expenses from the general fund to the special revenue funds. I did not reflect that at second quarter because I have not received any direction from the courts that I can use their special revenue funds, and I don't presume these things until I hear from a judge, but I can all but assure council that by the end of the year, those 2 agencies aren't going to be an issue. Public defender is likely going to be an issue. I think we're going to have to request to increase appropriation to the public defender's office. They are largely all staff. So this late in the year, it's difficult to make adjustments to their budget to compensate for a shortfall anyway, because they would have to let go of somebody. And a large part of the projected shortfall for the public defender is sick and vacation payouts for their former chief. That was substantial and not included in the budget. It's a one-time cost, so it's not in the 18 estimates, but we have to cover it. But
How much money are we talking about on that?
the public defender's estimated shortfall was about $200,000. Not all of that was the sick and vacation, but that's inclusive of everything. I will point out that the public defender reimbursement has increased in the state budget. So at the beginning of the year, we were at 41%. It fluctuated, and we're at 45% now. So there is some offset to the rising costs in that office. Everybody else, though, is under budget, so we're happy about that. I will note that the budget for general fund subsidies has increased from what we originally anticipated, because that's to include the solar panel project. So we had submitted fiscal items to council for that project earlier in the year, and that's why there's a change there. But the projection hasn't changed much because we've had that in the estimates at first quarter as well. Any questions?
So that affects the 2018 estimate, is that correct?
No, that's a one-time. The solar panel was a one-time cost.
And what year does it apply?
17.
In 17?
And it's being split between the general fund and the Health and Human Services Levy Fund. I believe it's about $7 million total, and the general fund hit is less than 5.5, but 5-point-something million.
I have a question, Mr. Chair, when you're ready.
Please proceed. Yeah, yes.
With regard to the public defender's office, you said it was a one-time hit, but then you also said there's a rising cost associated with that office.
So part of the $200,000 shortfall is a one-time hit. Some of that was for the sick and vacation payouts, but the rest of it is just the cost of doing business in that agency, which will be addressed at 2018 by council. And so the
Okay.
estimates that we're showing for 2018 assume no changes to the public defender's office. So we are showing essentially that we're going to be budgeting them to cover their total projected expenses, including the shortfall in 17. We're not making any recommended changes to the public defender's office. So that'll be a question for council, whether you want to pull them back
Do you know what your position will be on the prosecutor's office in terms of any requests for an increase in their budget opposed to the PD?
So I don't believe the prosecutor's office is going to be making a request for additional funding. We are proposing a cut to the prosecutor's office in order to balance the 2018 budget.
And we're also looking at assigned counsel fees being cut as well as a separate issue. Do you know about that?
No.
From the state? Okay. Well, I'll follow up with that. I thought there was something coming down the pipe on that. Okay.
No, I don't know anything about that.
Oh, okay.
But the
Assigned counsel fees.
reimbursement being cut?
Yes. I heard that's going to be shaved off as well. So,
I wouldn't be surprised because we've been balancing the state budget on that line item for a long time, but I haven't heard anything yet. I'll follow up.
okay. Just
Okay.
heads up for the budget. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
We're assuming 45%, which is what it is now. Thank you for that.
Councilman Gallagher.
That sick and vacation payout for the public defender, how many employees was that? Just the one? Mm-hmm. And what was that cost? That should be
I
burned
have
in
to
your
get
memory.
back to you, but I think it was about 50,000.
What's our policy on that?
So we pay accrued vacation up to, there is a cap, I don't know what the cap is. And then the sick time you get if you retire, but you only get 25%. That's the PERS thing, but we don't pay any other sick time out. And if you just quit, you don't get sick time.
Right. But we don't have a set policy on the payout on the vacation?
We do.
And what
I
is
just don't know it off the top of my head how many hours you're allowed to keep until they cut you off. But there is a cap on the
I
vacation.
thought the state was 3 years accumulated
I don't know. I could follow up with HR. I just don't know.
of vacation.
Yeah, I just don't know. I'm nowhere near.
Yeah, okay, not a big deal, thank you.
Yeah, I can find out though. That's an issue because when we have longtime employees that quit, especially if they retire, some of them have substantial payouts.
Well, and it gets actually deeper than that, but I won't get into that right now.
Okay.
It's not the time.
Okay.
Director, getting back to the solar panels, is that showing under miscellaneous or under subsidies?
Subsidies.
And the 2017 estimate is less than the budget by $1 million plus. So where does the money for the subsidies for the solar panel show up?
It's included in the 24 million. So the original budget for subsidies would have been 20 million or 19 million or something like that, whatever the difference is. The variance between the budget and the projection is that our general fund subsidies, we have two types of subsidies. One are fixed, which means the amount doesn't change regardless of how the agency spends. The Planning Commission gets a fixed subsidy. So if they bring in additional revenue, they aren't essentially penalized by cutting their subsidy. Then we have some of our own operating budgets that if they bring in additional revenue or they spend less, we only subsidize to the level that they need. That's where this variance is coming in, that since we have surpluses in almost every general fund department, including the ones that get subsidized, there will necessarily be a surplus in the subsidies as well.
So the surpluses that occurred elsewhere were enough to cover the extra cost on the solar panels. And
No. So the original budget, the budget that you're seeing, the 25.5 million, that has increased since the beginning of the year.
I see.
We came to council, I don't remember the resolution number offhand, but we did request additional appropriation in that budget.
So this is a current budget number, not
Yes.
the as-passed budget
Yes.
number? Okay. And why is the 2018 estimate higher by $5+ million on that item?
So in 2018, as of mid-year, we were anticipating an $8 million subsidy to the demolition fund in 2018 only. That's why there's an increase. There are other costs that are decreasing. And so that, like I said, the solar panel is one time in 17. That comes off in 18. Because some of our agencies have surpluses, we are assuming the same for 18. So we're assuming that subsidies will stay at that lower level.
Any other questions on the expenditures? Council President.
You had indicated that, I'm sorry. Maggie, you had indicated that there was some hit to the Health and Human Service Fund due to the solar panel project. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. So what the thought process that went into that is the cost of the solar panels is being booked in the centralized custodial fund, which is where we pay utilities. And the solar project essentially it's part of the larger CPP project that's estimated to save the county money on utilities in the long term. So we are booking the expense where we think the savings are going to show up essentially. So to divvy up between general fund and health and human service funds, we looked at who pays for the utilities. So we did a proportional split, and I would have to get back to you on the actual percentages, but so I'm making up numbers here. 75% of our utilities are paid for by the general fund, 10% by the levy funds, and then the balance are paid by special revenue funds. That's how we charged the costs of the solar panels to the two funds, but we did not charge special revenue funds.
All right, thank you.
Anything else? Proceed. Okay.
Okay. Okay, so moving on now to the 1/4% fund. This is also general fund, as I mentioned in the beginning, but we do segregate the dollars. This is the additional sales tax levied in 2007. This sales tax sunsets in 2027. So as of mid-year, we are assuming that revenue is going to be somewhat higher than the budget. At the time that the budget was passed, we were assuming about $72 million, and now we're assuming $77 million. We have two cash transfers that are coming into the 1/4% fund that we did not anticipate at the time the budget was developed. One are surplus dollars in one of our debt service funds, and the second is $10 million coming from the CCC FDC, which is the capital reserve for the Global Center for Health Innovation. So the contract or the agreement that we have with the CCC FDC, we pay them rent every year. It's $5.4 million. And then the surplus dollars, if they operate less than 5.4, goes into this capital fund. At the time that the capital fund is fully funded, those dollars revert to the county the following year. So in years past, the money had not been returned to the county. The CCC FDC retained the surpluses. They did segregate the money in a fund, so everything was as we would have done it, but the county stance is that the money should be in the county budget. So we are getting that returned in 2017, and that's $10 million. So that accounts for the pretty significant variance in revenue there. For expenditures, we're slightly over budget, and the variance there, as the councilman mentioned earlier, is the contributions for the arena deal for 2016. So I'm pulling from the cash balance in this fund, which is almost 90% of expenses, to cover that 2016 and 2017 cost. Any questions about the 1/4% fund?
It's clear that the 1/4% fund is in good shape at this time.
It's quite healthy.
Yes, okay, that's good. Yes.
Thank you. The 1/4% sales tax that sunsets in 2027, with the arrangement of those dollars going to the queue, how are we looking after year 10 in trying to make up that difference if that isn't going to be sunsetted?
So that was factored in the financing package for the Q Arena project. So we didn't assume that the 1/4% fund would be paying anything after 2027.
Okay.
We've been eyeballing this date for some time, so we
Right.
knew it when we were preparing that. I do want to point out, though, this fund is extraordinarily healthy, but I want the council to be aware that the $10 million that comes back that is going to be in the cash balance should stay as a reserve fund for the capital, for the Global Center. We will likely recommend a separate reserve fund so that it's restricted, but just keep in mind, when you look at that cash balance, it's still healthy, even if it's $37 million, but that is what part of that money is, so please don't spend it. The next slide is the general fund. So this combines general operating and 1/4%. Just a brief overview of where we stand for the general fund in total. We are in compliance with the county code requirement that requires us to maintain 25% cash balance. At the end of 2017, we're projecting that the cash balance will be 35% of total expenditures. In 2018, as I mentioned earlier, we are assuming no change to revenue and expenditures, so we're showing a huge drawdown on the cash balance to cover our expenses, which is why the cash balance dips below the minimum that's required in the code. We will be presenting a budget to council, though, for 2018 and 19 that is balanced. Any questions about the general fund?
Yes. Who has a question? Okay, Ms. Baker.
If I can just kind of follow up on the 0.25% again. You said that you're calculating not to have it continued.
Correct.
So where is the funding going to come from in order to meet the obligation?
So there are other revenue sources that are part of that package. There's the admissions tax that was the subject of debate, but so the Cleveland is going to, we hope, extend the admissions tax, which will support that. There's some sales tax dollars that will support that. And honestly, I probably have to get back to you. It's been a long time
Yeah,
since
I
I've looked
know,
at
I
that
can't remember
spreadsheet. But I know it was taken into consideration, but I can get back to you with those details.
All right, good, thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
Sorry?
Yes.
Bed tax, yes.
Okay. Please proceed.
Okay. Health and Human Services Levy Fund now. For 2017, we are projecting that we're going to end the year with an operating surplus of about $1 million. Our expenditure projection has increased by about $4 million since first quarter. That's not attributed to any one particular expense. It's just reflective of all the budgets that are supported by the Health and Human Services Levy Fund, which will also vary because of the revenue that comes into the county from federal and state sources. In 2017, we are assuming a drawdown on the cash balance in the operating funds, which we refer to as the Public Assistance Fund, of about $23 million. So this reduces how much the levy fund has to subsidize these other special revenue funds to cover our expenses. At the end of 2017, we are projecting that the cash balance in the PA fund will total $18 million. And as it stands right now, in the second quarter projections, we are assuming that $12 million of that 18 will offset 2018 expenses, and $5 million will offset 2019 expenses. At the end of 2019, we're assuming there will be no more public assistance fund, which is not to say that there is no more funding for Health and Human Services levy dollars. There is money in the levy fund itself. The public assistance funds, I've soapboxed about this a little bit, but we shouldn't be storing up huge cash balances in these operating funds. The reserves should be in the levy fund. That's my recommendation. So that's what we're doing right now, is we're just drawing down those dollars. If you have a huge surplus in the public assistance funds, it means that we're subsidizing incorrectly. So if there's all this cash there, that means that I've taken too much out of the levy fund and put it in these special revenue funds, and that's not how things should be.
Yes.
Excuse me. I hope I don't interrupt your train of thought.
No, that's okay.
Okay. I agree with you about the public assistance fund just being drawn down. I understood how it began, but I didn't understand why it had continued for so many years. But what I'm concerned about is the sustainability of the Health and Human Service Fund, not just over the next biennial, but over the next decade.
So I share those concerns because as of mid-year, we are assuming that in 18 and 19, we have operating deficits in both years. It increases substantially in 19 because there is no more cash to offset it. So we are going to have to make reductions to either balance the fund or at least to stay within the 10% cash balance requirement. So county code also has a cash balance requirement for the levy fund, which is 10% of expenditures. We are projecting right now that we're going to be below that minimum next year. And then it's going to deplete our levy fund in 19 if we don't make any changes.
So what's the plan?
We're going to be submitting a budget that includes cuts, a combination of spending cuts and additional revenue that will balance the levy
What's the
fund.
long-term plan?
For the levies, we have to operate at a lower level or find another payer for the programs and services that we're offering. The other option would be either a new levy or to increase the millage on one of the ones that's up. So we have one on the ballot next year. We could increase the millage. One mill is about $26 million.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Chair.
So, is it okay? Along those lines, I saw the revenue was increased with real property revenue, correct?
Slightly, yes.
Slightly. And that's just the shift in the market that we're generating additional dollars from increased property values?
No, largely the increase here would be from the push to collect delinquent property taxes.
Is this from the sales,
And the
selling our
tax lien sale.
tax lien
So we did
sale?
we did a tax lien sale at the end of last year. So we're not that much over budget. And the revenue's up about $1 million from last year. So it's not an insignificant amount of money. We can do a lot with $1 million. But that's where that's largely coming from. I will point out that we have the 6-year property appraisals next year. So, hopefully we'll see some increased revenue in 2019 as a result of that appraisal.
And just a step backward for a minute, I saw that our reserve on the general fund dollars was projected 35%. And we're going to be looking at a budget with shortfalls, so that's something for us to pay attention to. I would
Absolutely.
think.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The 35% reserve is largely the 1/4% fund. So the general operating fund, if you distinguish between the two, which I like that we distinguish between the two, is 20%, which is in line with best practices. It's at the low end of best practices, but it doesn't comport with the code.
So you're kind of putting those together for 35%?
Yes, because
Special revenue,
the code speaks only to the general fund, not the general operating fund. So that's why, it probably drives you guys crazy that I come up here with like 5 different slides for the general operating fund, but that's why. And the code only talks about that. And the 1/4% fund is a sub-fund in the general fund. But I distinguish.
No, thank you. That we'll be aware of that. Okay.
Chairman. Thank you. Maggie, the subsidies to other funds, the 2018 estimate is $20 million above 2017's estimate. Explain what that is.
Absolutely. This
Why
is
that
a combination of largely 2 things. One is the decrease in PA dollars. So in 2017, we have a drawdown of about $23 million. In 2018, that goes down to $12 million. So if we don't make any change to expenditures, the levies are going to have to pick up the difference between the 23 and the 12. And then also costs are increasing. So we assume in our 18 estimates, we're assuming that we're going to have cost of living increases of 2% on all salaries. So cost of living or merit, however the appointing authorities want to apportion that. Benefits costs are going up. So we have that worked into the numbers as well. So the subsidies have to increase when our cost of doing business increases.
So let me give part of that back to you. You're saying that the PA dollars that will be used at that time are reflected here?
Yes.
A significant portion of where they're going to subsidize other funds.
Yes, so in 2017, so I have the levy fund over here, right, and then let's just say I have 10 operating funds that support so one's for DCFS, one's for DSAS. Those funds all have cash in them that combined was $40 million at the beginning of the year. So I am subsidizing less than their total expenses because they have this cash, so they don't need it. We don't give money if you don't need it. But in 2017, that's $23 million, but the cash is not going to be replenished because we're doing a better job on how much we subsidize now. So in years past, we just continue to subsidize at these higher amounts, even though the revenue was coming in and they didn't need it. And then you had this buildup of cash, but we're drawing that down now. And next year, there's only $12 million to support these expenses, which is a $10 million difference.
Are you aware at this time what the other funds are?
What
In
other
other words, when it
funds?
says subsidies, this $20 million is used to subsidize other funds.
Those are all the operating funds for the different agencies. So we have 3 sub-funds in the Department of Children and Family Services, the Senior Adult Services has 1, Early Childhood has 3. I mean, I can go over those in more detail, but there's probably 20 sub-funds that make up Health and Human Services.
My question was, were you aware of those 20? Where this 20 million, is it going like spread evenly across all of them, or are there any ones in particular that
So-
you're aware that the 20 million is going towards?
It's not spread evenly. Most of it will be for Children and Family Services because they're our largest, one of the largest agencies, and they're the largest user of levy dollars. But we will move the cash as needed, just based on to make sure there is cash in all the funds. But it changes every year, every quarter actually, as a result of the assessments that we do from the state to see who we can get reimbursement from. So all the staff in the Department of Health and Human Services do these RMS studies, which probably someone has talked to you guys about the RMS studies. So that is then asking the staff person, hey, what did you work on today? And if half their day was spent on food stamps, that's who we're charging that expense to. If it was Medicaid, that's how we're charging it. But those change daily. So that's how it's difficult to anticipate the revenue coming in because there's 50 different revenue sources, and it really depends on the types of clients that we're getting in the agency. So if the Medicaid numbers are going up, then our Medicaid reimbursement will go up, but it's hard to always track. Who are we seeing? Who did you see this week? How is it different from who you saw last week? Because that impacts the revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Simon, did you have a question?
Go ahead, and then I'll go after you.
Okay. The 10 million that's the reserve within the 0.25% sales tax. The reserve language actually talks about an unobligated balance. It seems to me that 10 million should be backed out of the reserve calculation. Am I right about that?
So I would agree with you, but we've talked about this. The language in the code is slightly ambiguous. So that's why I'm constantly reporting on adjusted balance and adjusted balance.
Now, if
that
you
it's
took
not
it-
clear what.
If you take it out and put it in a separate fund, which you were talking about, well, then it would come out.
Right.
Yeah.
And it I would argue should come out even if we keep it in this fund, because it is an obligation that the county has, that you don't want to spend the 10 million and realize next year that the convention center needs a new roof and not have any money.
Yeah, I would
But we
support
should
that.
maybe talk about the language of the code.
Yes, okay.
'Cause it-
Now, you said that the PA fund balance is going to decline by 23 million this year, and we have a 1 million surplus in the levy fund, meaning that this year we're spending 22 million more than we're taking in. And of that 22 million, how much is one time?
Not enough that it's even worth mentioning. I'm not aware of any significant one-time
So
expenses.
none of the
This is a structural problem.
the allocations for the 10 million for UPK, that none of that's in 2017, is that?
The UPK's in 2017, but that's a permanent, I'm assuming that's a permanent expansion. So the UPK numbers are up in 18 and 19 as well. We started that, so, okay,
That's not how it was presented to us.
I know.
It was presented to us that this was a one-time shot, and you know, I know that we need it, and I think it's important to think about it. But
So to that point, although really quickly, the solar panels will be one time. So that's, I think, about $1.5 million in the levy. So that comes, and that's reflected in the estimates that it's coming out next year. But to this question, so remember, we present a budget, or we approve, as a county, we approve a budget, and the budget says this is what's gonna happen next year. Once January 2nd hits, from OBM's perspective, we're gonna give you numbers that are based on what the data show, regardless sometimes of what the intentions were in the budget. That's why the numbers fluctuate sometimes, because as we get decisions that come down from the 8th floor, either from the executive or council, my numbers will change. The UPK expansion was started with one-time public assistance dollars, but my understanding from the executive is that that is a permanent expansion that will at least run through 2020.
Well, if that's the case, I think we're gonna have to take a look at the millage level.
Okay,
Just a thought.
so that's, just to be clear though, that's in my 18 and 19 estimates, and once you get the budget documents, it'll be in the 20 estimates, because we go 2 years out, that UPK is going to continue.
Okay, Ms. Simon.
So maybe you answered this, why the smaller levy, will, when it expires, we're looking at revenue decrease of 104 million?
If it's not renewed.
Oh, if it's not, should this levy continue, revenue will decrease by 104.
Not continue.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear, okay.
At least you're reading it. Yeah, that's correct. Not continue, sorry. It would cost us $104 million if the levy doesn't continue.
Okay. Any other questions on the HHS levy fund? Okay, Director?
Okay. So the next slide is just a graphic that shows essentially the agencies that are benefiting from the levy dollars. As I mentioned, Children and Family Services receives the largest levy subsidy. It's more than $60 million every year. And then the bottom slide, which I update council every month on the number of children that we have in placement at DCFS, it is continuing to increase. In May, I believe I mentioned that we were at the highest we've been since 2011. We hit 2,000 kids in custody for the first time since 2011. That number has been going down every week since we hit the 2,000, although last week the number spiked up by 20. As of this morning, we had, I think 1930 something, so 1935 kids in care. So the number is going down a little bit, though not significantly every week, so we're still much higher than we've been in the past. And that's something to keep in mind as we go into the budget process.
When you say it's more than we've been in the past, that's only more than we've had in the recent past.
In the recent,
In
the
the
past
far
we
past,
were
we've had like twice as
6,000,
many.
yes. So in 2000, 2001, we had on average 6,000 kids in custody at any time.
Just wanted to remind everybody of
Absolutely.
that.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it's trended higher and that's a concern, but compared to where we were at one point, we're nowhere close.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
So, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
oh, sorry. So that increase, I think, has to do commensurate with the drugs, right? I mean, there's a lot of the uptick because of the opiate crisis
yes,
and some
so,
of the cocaine uptick as well, by the way.
Yes, I was just going to distinguish that a lot of the increase we can attribute to, I mean, I think 85% of our parents have some sort of behavioral issue, and that's largely what's causing the children to be removed. But yes, but it's not just the opiate, so that is why it's cocaine too.
Okay. Ms. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess after hearing about the 10 million for UPK, was there any indication that the infant mortality and workforce development programs would be treated the same?
So for infant mortality, we are assuming right now that it's one time. There was $1 million that was committed last year, 500,000 this year. To date, nothing's been paid, so the $1 million carried over, and we're assuming that those payments are going to be made this year. I know the county was working with the city of Cleveland to develop First Year Cleveland, so that's why there's been slow payments, but they have been working on that. For the workforce development, there was $3 million, and we are assuming that also is going to continue.
Okay, if my memory serves me correct, I thought we did a 4 million. So is it 3 and 1 or this is?
For workforce?
Yeah.
I thought it was 3 and 3.
Okay, it could
3 and
be.
3.
3 and 3.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it's 3 and 3.
All right.
And we hired staff with those, so if, it's hard to turn that off a
Okay.
year later.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay,
I just want to point out on the children and placement that Cuyahoga County is not unique. I mean, I think everyone's reading the headlines, but I get notices every day that statewide, every county is dealing with this. Placement numbers are up, and it's a nationwide problem. Okay, so the next slide is the all funds budget. The county's all funds budget includes a general fund, all our special revenue funds, internal service funds, enterprise funds. It does not include categorical grants and capital funds. This will change when we implement the new ERP. So probably not this time next year, but in 2019, when I say all funds, it really will mean all funds. So right now, we don't, I'm not showing you a lot of what the county is spending, which bothers me. And the all funds is different from the general fund in that there's no cash balance requirements. Some of our special revenue funds do have cash balance requirements that are ORC based, like the DTAC funds. But in general, these funds, it's not always alarming if we're spending more than we're bringing in. A lot of these funds essentially store up cash for years in anticipation of a large spend. That's how the demolition fund was. We had 10, 20, 30, $40 million in that fund, and now they're spending it in earnest this year. And the same for the court's computerization funds, that they store up cash for 5 years and then they do large computer refresh projects, which I believe the court is looking to do this year. When they did it last time, it was $1.3 million. So it takes several years to generate that kind of money. We have slight deficits that we're projecting in only 5 of our agency departments. 3 of them are the ones that I mentioned before from the general fund, and the other 2 I believe we can cover through cash. So it's just as a matter of me asking for additional appropriation from council. The next slide is the 2018 and 2019 outlook. So as we've talked about before, in 2018 in the general operating fund, we are projecting a deficit of $58 million. That decreases slightly in 2019 to $57 million. The decrease is largely a combination of not having the demo fund subsidy, which was $8 million, and then it's offset by increases in personnel costs. So we're assuming in 2018, as I had mentioned, the salary adjustments of 2%, but then also that hospitalization costs are going to increase by 6%, and we're assuming that for 19 too. So 2018, 19 are about the same. Again, as I had mentioned, in 2018 for the general fund will be below the recommended cash balance requirements at 12%, and in 2019 we will have eliminated our cash reserve if we don't make changes to either revenue and expenses. On the levy side, we have deficits projected in $18 million. It jumps up to $30 million in 2019. This jump is largely reflective of, we just said, of the PA funds. So there's not going to be cash in 2019 to support the expenses to the level that there was in 18 and 17. For the levy fund in 2018, we will be below the 10% cash balance requirement if we don't make changes. And by 2019, we will have eliminated our cash reserves in the levies. And just as another reminder that our smaller levy is supposed to be on the ballot next year. Questions?
Yes. Director. I understand that some adjustments are being made to these assumptions in preparation for the base budget, and I would like if you could discuss that aspect.
Sure. So generally speaking, this year was a little different, but generally when we prepare the upcoming biennial budget, we will start with our estimates at mid-year for the future year, and then we will make decisions based on what those estimates show. When we make decisions, we will look at a combination of what we call base adjustments, which are largely driven by the fiscal office, which is either correcting an error that we made or we have some sort of decision based on something we've done, but it's different from a targeted cut. And then we have our targeted cuts. So for 2018 and 19, we do have some base adjustments from what was reflected 5 minutes ago. One of them is benefits expenses. So our hospitalization costs, we allocate countywide to every agency and department. It shows up in their personal benefits budget. And that is essentially the employer's share of their employees' hospitalization. Prior to mid-year, HR had indicated to us that the costs were going to be going up beyond what we had anticipated at first quarter, so we did end up increasing our projection for hospitalization, which then increases the projections for every agency and department that has employees that take our benefits, and that's everybody but BODD. After we published the report, we were notified that the estimate was too high, so it would be coming down. So we are assuming right now that the 2018 estimate for benefits is going to decrease by $8 million. The general fund impact of that is $4 million. Health and Human Services levy impact of that is $1 million. So what we were showing now, for 18 and 19, we think that the deficit will come down by that $5 million. Questions on that? Okay. The next one is for information technology, and I did touch on this in the beginning of the presentation. We had assumed at mid-year that the $6.1 million for the ERP costs were going to be coming onto the operating budget in 2019. We had a conversation, excuse me, post-publication of the report where they are changing the schedule for some of the human resources phase-in of the project, and now there are going to be additional dollars in the ERP project made available in 2019 that can cover the operating costs. So now I'm being told that the operating costs won't actually hit the general fund budget until 2020. So that would be a base adjustment that I will want to take that out of the estimates. The second one is related to the ERP that OBM had backed out the cost of our existing systems, the legacy systems, from the 2019 estimates, and assuming that they would have gone away by then. And I'm being told now that that's not the case, so we are putting back in the budget funding for maintenance on FAMUS, which is the financial system, and SAP, which is the human resources system.
What's the amount on that?
Sorry? It's $725,000 in total,
And that's for what year?
2019.
Okay, 725,000.
Mm-hmm. The next one is for Public Works for the capital improvement plan. In 2015, the budget that was approved for 2016 and 17 included the 5-year capital improvement plan. So we go 5 years out with the CIP as opposed to just the 2 years in the operating budget. We had originally allocated $15.2 million for the CIP in 2018. That would be an increase of about $7 million from what we're spending this year. So we've been working with Public Works pretty much all year, actually, to fine-tune how they actually budget for the CIP. What's happened in years past is they'll present, I'm making up numbers here, but 30 projects on the CIP and say this is going to total $20 million. And that $20 million is the cost of all those 30 projects. Most of these projects, though, span years. So you don't need the $30 million in that given year. It'll be spread out over 2 or sometimes 3 years. So we've been looking at Public Works because what we're finding is, I mean, if you've read the report, we have some issues with our capital projects anyway, but that we're over budgeting them in a given year, and then we're surprised 2 years later when we have all these expenses related to projects that we had already approved. So we've been working with Public Works, and what we've come to is that of the $15 million in total for the projects, they'll probably only spend $10 million next year. So we're not taking projects off the plan, but cash out the door in 2018 is going to be $10 million. So our recommendation to the executive and to council will be to cut that $15 million back so that we're not over obligating those dollars.
That's for what year?
That's for 18 and 19. It was 15.2 in both years.
Okay.
The next one is the $500,000 adjustment to the Board of Elections. We've just been working with the board to try to better estimate their costs, and they actually submitted a budget to the executive that was about $700,000 less than what we had projected at mid-year. So we had originally assumed taking off $500,000, and we'll take off the full $700,000 that they requested. But that's based on numbers that were approved by the Board of Elections for what they're going to need next year. Also for the Board of Elections, the revenue estimate for 2018 is low by $1 million. So when I was doing my revenue estimates for the general fund, I had looked at prior year activity, and every other year we get reimbursed for elections costs by the municipalities. And what hasn't happened in the last however many years is a Cleveland primary that's happening this year. So we will get reimbursed for that next year. So I'm increasing the general fund revenue estimate for 18, one time only, by $1 million. And then the executive will likely be recommending, it's our recommendation, to reduce the 2018 and 19 estimates for the Court of Common Pleas and the Juvenile Court by the amount that they're overspending in 2017. So as I mentioned earlier, the 2018 estimates assume that nothing will change in the courts. So even though I'm largely confident that we're not going to bail them out this year, until I know that, I'm going to show what I think is going to happen if we don't make a decision. So, you know, we have argued that the 18 estimates are going to essentially reward overspending, so we would recommend reducing their budget. And I've already confirmed with both courts that they're going to cover their deficit in 17 anyway, so, I mean, I don't anticipate that we'll get much pushback on this one.
So how much will that change the estimates in 2018 and 19?
So that's about $10 million. There's,
year.
there's one more for juvenile court. As part of, when juvenile presented their plan to pay for their wage increase, they had included a number of new fees, increase to existing fees, some cost savings. And one of the things they had included was working with the Ohio Attorney General's office to collect delinquent court costs. So we're doing that in the general division with the clerks as well. And that was $800,000, which I assumed would be one time only, because usually you get one big push from the delinquents and then it's just a little bit going out. I have since been notified by the court that the Ohio Attorney General won't go after their delinquencies because 99% of the kids in juvenile court are indigent, so you can't go after them anyway. And the way the statute reads is you can't hold the parents financially responsible for the child. So my recommendation to the executive was take down the general fund revenue estimate, because we're not going to get that $800,000, and cut the court's budget by the same amount, because their implementation of those higher wages was supposed to be cost neutral to the county. And he's agreeing. So in total, that's $10.6 million in base adjustments to 2018 and $16 million in 2019. So then what we do on our end is we would run a report that would show now what does our deficit look like. And we started out originally 58 and 57 million. I'd back these two off, and then we start with our targeted cuts.
So that that quickly takes care of about a quarter of the problem. The rest of it's going to be a lot more difficult.
It is.
Any questions on the adjustments to the base budget? Okay. And now I'm going to ask whether anybody has any further questions on what we've heard discussed today. Ms. Baker.
Just for clarification, the HHS levy you mentioned was the smaller levy. So that would ask, what is the bigger levy, and what year would that be going on, presumably?
It's 4.8 mils, and it was approved either last year or the year before for 8 years.
It goes to
The years are running
2020.
ahead.
It goes to 2024.
We have some time on that one.
Okay.
The 3.9 was last renewed for 5 years. So 2018 is the fifth of 5 years.
That was for how many?
3.9 mils.
3.9.
And the larger one is 4.8 mils.
Got it.
The 3.9, when it was last approved, it had increased from 2.9. It started out as a 2.9.
Okay.
Council President.
For the first few years that the new county council existed, we were looking at the health and human service levy budget, yes, levies, and there was some consensus that we should go for, instead of the 4-year levy that we had for quite some time, that we would go for an 8-year levy, so there wouldn't be as many campaigns, and so there wouldn't be as much money needed to run those campaigns and that sort of thing. So we find ourselves now where we put ourselves. But the question is, with the levy next year, if we were to do it as we have done it in the past, it would only be for 4 years. If we did it as we might have considered doing it, it would be for 8 years or even more. The upside of that is already obvious. The downside is that if we have a problem, then we'll have to make some adjustments anyway, regardless of how long the levy is set for.
You mean if it goes for 8 and then we need money?
Right.
You'd have
So
to do it.
We're stuck at the level. So I think it's up to me. It's questionable whether we should go for any longer than 4 years in the levy next year, considering the potential that we may need to adjust that levy, if not now, then sooner than 8 years later. And since it's a smaller levy, we should stay focused on the reality of that and what that means in terms of passing levies.
I think it's an excellent point.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, Ms. Brown?
Thank you. In the corner, it says future year estimates, anticipated COLA, increases in salaries, and I just wondered if you have that figure at maybe 1%, 2%. Did I miss that part?
2%.
2%? And is that countywide?
Yes.
Okay, and do we have that figure?
And how much it is?
Yes.
In 2018, I think it's about 4 million. I can get you the exact figure.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? I would like to just bring to everybody's attention that the next step along this process is going to be on September 26th in Committee of the Whole, and that's the first official part of the budget process, in the sense that we're going to be doing it in the Committee of the Whole and not in the Finance Committee. And at that point, we're still not going to have an official budget introduction by the administration. That's not going to come until the time of the first council meeting in October. But what's going to happen at the meeting on September 26th is the administration is going to give us kind of a 30,000-foot level strategic presentation as to how they're proposing to close what looks like significant gaps at this point, and so we're gonna get the broad concept, and we're gonna have something to start thinking about in terms of the general direction, and so that's the meeting on the 26th, and then at the first council meeting in October, then we'll have the overview presentation of the actual budget document. So that's kind of kind of the roadmap. So, any further discussion? Hearing none. Thank you very much for presenting the second quarter report. Is there any miscellaneous business? Has anyone signed in for public comment?
No, Mr. Chair, no one has signed in.
There being nothing further to hold our attention, this committee is adjourned. Thank you very much.